get started. Welcome, everyone. There's a couple of housekeeping suggestions. If everyone would please put your phone on silent so we don't hear the ringing of bells. And you may want to put your view on the active speaker view so you don't have to keep going through the pages to find the speaker. So let me get started. I'm Joni Shubin, and I welcome all of you here tonight. Valerie Habiff and I founded a grassroots group in Atlanta called the Jewish Democratic Women's Salon. JDWS was found out of outrage, as you might guess, and we are still propelled by outrage. Our goal is to educate, engage, and empower the 1,500 strong Jewish women of JDWS into action on the progressive issues that mean so much to all of us. Which brings us to tonight's program. We are so excited to have three powerful Democratic state legislators with us here this evening. Representative Mary Robichaux from House District 48, Representative Josh McLaurin from House District 51, and Representative Angelika Kausche from House District 50. These legislators work together on local issues that matter most to us. Expanding healthcare in Georgia and protecting women's reproductive rights, protecting us from gun violence, and preserving and assuring educational opportunities for all Georgia citizens, and standing up in defense of our climate against the human forces that continue to pose threats to Georgia's land, air, and water. When we started JDWS, we knew we wanted our focus to be local, because local is where we can make the largest impact. The work of these legislators may not make the front pages of the news, but trust me, as members of the state's minority party, much of the work that they do is to stop destructive legislation that you never even hear about. In order to empower them to make new laws, the laws we all want to see, we need to get them more colleagues, but that's our next show. Tonight, we want to celebrate their efforts on our behalf and find out what we can do to make sure they go right back to where they are most needed in January, under the gold dome of the Georgia State Capitol. I want to take a second to thank Mary Barron and Alice Wertheim, our JDWS election outreach coordinators, for their efforts of putting together tonight's program, and for the North Fulton Dems for co-sponsoring tonight's program. COVID requires that we think out of the box, and I know we are all zoomed out, but this is our best option to the face-to-face meet and greets we so desperately want to have again. And with that said, I'm going to turn tonight's program over to Mary Barron.
Hey everyone, my name is Mary Barron, and I'm a member of JDWS and also an active member of the North Fulton Democrats. And so I want to welcome you on behalf of both organizations, and I want to urge you to please get involved with your local county Democratic parties. Our local North Fulton Dems, we have a very active Facebook page, so please go on the page and like it and follow it. That's where you're going to find out all of the information about how to volunteer with these candidates and how to get involved with helping good candidates get elected in November. Also, please go to fultondems.org. We have a lot of information about voting on that page, and we have a great voter guide where you can find out information about all the candidates that will be on your ballot. And while I'm on the subject of the North Fulton Dems, I'd like to just introduce the chair of the North Fulton Dems, Terry Crawford, who I didn't realize was going to be on the meeting, but I'm really glad to see her here, and she does a great job leading our group. And so I want to welcome her and also wish her a happy birthday, because today is her birthday.
Thank you, Mary.
So next, I'd like to ask each of the candidates to introduce themselves and give us a little bit about their background and a little bit of information about the district that they represent. So if we could just go in alphabetical order and start with Angelika Kausche.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and thank you for having us tonight. Give us an opportunity in these times to express what we stand for and get a little bit connected with voters, which is so difficult. Like everybody else here, I really miss the personal meet and greets, and but this is the best we can do. So my name is Angelika Kausche. I am the state representative for House District 50, and I was elected in 2018 and now running for re-election. I am originally from Germany. We came to the US in 1997 and naturalized in 2011. And I got thrown into the political storm as it is now in 2015-16. And started out as in the John Ossoff campaign, and eventually decided to run for this critical seat in North Fulton that used to be majorly Republican. I won the election by a small margin, only 342 votes, and is still considered a swing district. House District 50 is one of the most contested seats in this race, so every effort here counts. My first 2 years in the State House, where really my efforts were to, as Joni mentioned, defending bad bills with my colleagues and really standing up for what we believe in, and is this making sure that all Georgians have affordable quality health care, that we keep public education strong and fully fund the public schools. And also one of the things I'm very concerned about, and I put a lot of effort in, is really thinking about sustainable development, sustainable economic development, and clean energy. So I'm looking forward to working on these issues in 2021. But first we have election coming up, and we have to put all our efforts into making sure that we keep the seats we flipped in 2018, and in addition win a few more so that we finally have more power and leverage at the State House. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Angelika. Okay, so Josh is next.
Thank you, Mary. Hi, and I'll go ahead and brag on Mary being a constituent. Super proud of that. And also, I recognize a lot of constituents on the Zoom tonight, and I hope some are watching on Facebook. My name is Josh McLaurin. I represent House District 51, which comprises parts of Sandy Springs, Roswell, and Johns Creek. It's a great district. It is largely a district where people go home to see their families and go to sleep before they commute outward. I think Sandy Springs, for example, by itself well, before COVID, the stat was something like 100,000 people both came into Sandy Springs and left Sandy Springs every day, and only about 7,000 actually stayed where they live to work also. So it's a very suburban district. I mean, these are all suburban districts, but Sandy Springs and Roswell and Johns Creek have some of the most cutting edge challenges when it comes to thinking about how we are going to do sustainable economic development and social integration in the next few years or decades. Sandy Springs has part of Georgia 400, which is that has been in the news the last couple of years. In fact, I got some mail today that GDOT is doing public comment on the Express Lanes project that's doing along 400. So you have a lot of neighborhoods affected by that. So our district is really well, affordable housing too is a great example of this, that, you know, we've got basically two communities that, you know, there's a lot of trees, and trees are really nice, but they also block us from seeing who lives nearby. We don't sometimes know who our neighbors are or what types of communities are just around the corner. So you have a lot of people in apartments in the north end of Sandy Springs, and you have a lot of single family, and also along Roswell Road, Holcomb Bridge, you have a lot of apartments, but you also have a lot of single family homes all over District 51. And so it is a challenge to represent a district that, especially like Angelika was saying, is a swing district with almost 50% Republican and Democrat, to find a way to articulate a vision for what the suburbs are going to look like in the future that's inclusive, that makes the best use of the space that we have, and supports working families. So that's the kind of work we're doing. I guess I went out of order. I am originally from Cobb County. I went to high school inside the perimeter, went to UGA for undergrad, went to Yale for law school, came back to Atlanta, started working in a law firm setting, and I do civil litigation. So, you know, the common speak for that as business fighting. If somebody breaches a contract, call me. But it's a good line of work to be doing to support the state legislative work, because we have to read legislation, understand it, make sense of it all the time. And make sense of is kind of a strong phrase to use for a lot of Republican legislation that comes out of Judiciary Non-Civil Committee, where criminal justice issues are handled. That's the one where I do the most work. But a lot of the legislation that the majority party has put forward, like Angelika said, I mean, they've gotten lazy. I think they're used to having the power to do almost anything they want, and so they're a lot less connected to what voters want in the last few years, the last decade or so. And so, not that they had a great hold on it to begin with, but it's obvious now that they're way less committed to governance, and they're way more committed to culture war and socially divisive issues, just for the sake of shoring up their base. You see it with the governor's actions too. So I'll stop going on about all the substantive stuff. I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I hope that we can help empower you to empower us to empower you. We want to work with you to keep up the momentum in 2020 and beyond, and we're looking forward to a new Democratic majority in the state.
Thanks, Josh. So Mary.
Thanks, Mary. And I also want to offer my thanks to this group in North Fulton Dems and everyone who's taking the time to watch this. As we said, being on Zoom meetings, although I like to see different people's decorating ideas and go, oh, I could do that, or no, that wouldn't work in my house. So kind of make it as interesting as you can to see what different people will use. So I am Mary Robichaux, and I represent House District 48, which is actually the majority of Roswell. I share with Josh and two other representatives. I have one precinct each of Roswell. And then I have two small precincts in Alpharetta. So as Josh said, I'm also cover the 400 corridor. I'm the northern part of it. So 400 runs through both my Roswell and my Alpharetta precincts. So understand the communication, transportation, the ways in which we have different communities. But what we've also seen, unfortunately, let me step back. My background, actually, as you can tell from the last name, I was born in Louisiana. So moved here about 30 years ago to Georgia after traveling a little bit with my husband's job to different parts of the country and overseas a bit. And then my husband and I have been in our current home for almost 28 years. We raised our twin sons here. So we are long-term residents of Roswell. Kind of like all of us, did not really get involved in politics till actually the Obama campaigns, but I was more the behind the scenes. And then like a lot of us, my district was actually gerrymandered in 2010 to include my neighborhood because it was such a strong Republican neighborhood. Well, lo and behold, they didn't know what they were getting when they gerrymandered us in. I ran in a seat that really had not had a viable contender in 20 years. And actually in those 20 years, they had had one Democrat run, but it had been a long-standing. And I actually do have the honor, as Angelika won by a very small margin. I actually won by the absolute smallest margin of the entire state. So I won by 152 votes out of 23,000, a little bit over 23,000 cast. So I am the poster child for anyone who says that a single vote doesn't matter. It does. If you think about the statistics of that, it's amazing. My background is actually healthcare. I'm a healthcare, both on the clinical side and administration side, with a specialty in actually public health and health disparity reduction. So I find myself now in a very interesting time, unfortunately, with this pandemic. And I think we've all said that we try to fight the bad bills, and I think we were successful on a lot of them. Unfortunately, we didn't have the majority to really fight some of the other ones, and we want to go back and take that on. When you think about it, even the hate crimes bill, it took the Senate over 460 days to even take up the crime. Not only the hate crimes bill, it wasn't so much that it took that many days, it took the death of a young man, a murder, a lynching, whatever you want to call it. When everyone finally saw those videos, that's a lynching. We cannot be that anymore. And that's what it took to cause Georgia to finally pass a hate crimes bill. When we look at that, that's not acceptable. And I don't think any of the three of us know that's not acceptable. And those of you on this call know it's not. The Democratic caucus, we have been working hard. We've put forth a lot of bills in everything from healthcare, obviously my background, to, Josh is civil litigation, but knows the law much better. I'm very bad. One of my twin sons is actually an attorney. So when there's a bill that I really do, it makes no sense to me. Josh, or you may see me in the session texting someone, and I'm usually checking with my private personal consultant. Does this make sense? Because if I read this, it says this, but that can't be what they're trying to pass. And he'll be like, no, Mom, that's really what they're trying to pass. We put together from the caucus what's called Justice for All. It's a 12 bill package that we think we should pass here in Georgia. And yes, the hate crimes bill was part of that, but it includes things such as repeal of stand your ground, repeal of citizens arrest, and some other things which we can talk about later. We're looking for ways in which, what are the biggest healthcare things? Unfortunately, with COVID, has exposed to the entire world what health disparities is doing to the population of the United States. And that is not just for their health. We know the larger percentage of Black and brown people are dying of the disease, having more serious consequences from it, but it's the inequalities in housing and economics and jobs. So it's really exposed that, and we need to be fixing those things.
Thanks. So I'm going to ask each of you a question, but if any of our viewers has a question they would like to ask, go ahead and type it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it. But since I went alphabetical before, I'll go reverse alphabetical this time and start with Mary again. And you just were talking about healthcare, so that's a perfect segue to the question I'm going to ask of you. I've heard you speak about healthcare so many times, and I know that because of your lived experience and your professional career, it's a big issue for you. So my question is, Governor Kemp has proposed a healthcare plan that involves federal waivers from Medicaid and Affordable Care Act provisions. Without getting into too much specifics about what those waivers are, because we could be here all night, can you tell us what you think would happen if Governor Kemp's plan was implemented, and what would you propose to do differently? Well,
in regards to Governor Kemp's plan, those of you may or may not know, in actuality, even though we spent almost $2 million on a consultant group to help develop these waivers, they've already had to be put on the shelf and not used because of COVID, and they just were not going to be viable in the situation we found ourselves in Georgia, nor across the country. So CMS and others who would have had to grant those waivers said, no, stop. There are some that might still be moving forward. The problem was, in a lot of ways, they were going to do things only covering a certain group of people up to the 100% poverty line, whereas, at 130 is where you get the federal match dollars back. We're losing so much money out of the state that we are still paying to the federal government. It leaves the state. And other things in that, one of the things in regards to the Affordable Care Act that the program was trying to do was make it so that insurers would not really have to cover the same type of preventative services, reproductive health services, those 10 requirements under the Affordable Care Act. Some of it possibly was even going toward the concept of pre-existing conditions. Mary alluded to, for those of you who don't know my story, of my twin sons, one was actually born with a congenital heart defect and has had multiple open heart surgeries. The last one was about 3 years ago as a 35-year-old. And again, we're one of the lucky ones. My son has always had great health care. He currently works at Emory Healthcare, so he is covered. And they do not have a lifetime max or a pre-existing condition waiver concept, which some employers, this kind of change would have allowed that. Think about that. If I look at my son, we probably overall, about $4 to $5 million for his entire lifetime so far has been spent on his care. Now, my son does medical research. He's an epidemiologist also, and he actually has published 2 papers on COVID. So I personally think that dollar investment is well worth it. But it shouldn't depend on whether or not you can afford it, or even if you have the kind of healthcare we've had, that you get the quality care. I think all of us would propose total expansion of Medicaid. These are dollars that we have paid in. They are Georgia dollars, and we need them bring them back to Georgia. The other thing is, when you think about it, that would cover almost 500,000 more people, possibly more now, because what we've seen, unfortunately, with COVID, people have lost their jobs. And a lot of times when you lose your job, you lose your healthcare coverage. And people are still now trying to figure out, what are they going to do next? When we think about that, Medicaid expansion will also be a job creator. We estimate about 50,000 new high-paying jobs could come into this state, especially if we do it right. The other problem, you know, when you think about not just the governor's plan, one of the plans that the Republicans have been using and touting is the tax credit for the rural healthcare systems, that's saving rural healthcare. In October, 2 more hospitals will close in rural Georgia. So within the last 5 years, we will have had 9 hospitals close in Georgia, all of them rural, at a time we can't afford that because people are dying and we need to fix it. So full Medicaid expansion with some other things we're working on and talking about. Mary, I don't know if there's a whole lot, but.
Thanks, Mary. So Josh, if I could ask you next. With our country's reckoning on issues of racial injustice, the criminal legal system has come under scrutiny. And I know that you serve on the Judicial Non-Civil Committee, so these issues are something you have worked with in the legislature. What were some of the positive and negative experiences you had working on that committee? Were there areas where you felt there was bipartisanship and you could see progress being made on criminal legal issues? And were there some disappointments, some disappointing things that happened in the legislature, some bills that maybe you were unhappy that got passed or things you wished had gotten passed? And also there was a question in the chat from James about the arrest, wait, let me read it again, about the citizens arrest law. And I know that you have been on the hearings with Representative Efstration this summer. So if you could address that as well.
That's a great question, and thank you. At the risk of going into too much detail about too many bills, I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. My top line comment for thinking about all of the criminal justice or criminal legal bills that go through the legislature is, wouldn't it be nice if the framework that we had for talking about criminal justice in the legislature had to do with moving the ball forward as opposed to stopping the ball from moving backward, right? The problem with the Republican majority's approach to criminal justice is they are constantly taking these little bites to make the system even worse, and sometimes some big bites. And so the vast majority of our energy on the Judiciary and Non-Civil Committee goes toward trying to stop bad things from happening. I mean, just off the top of my head, there was a bill to expand private probation that didn't make it this past time, but a former state representative who owns a stake in a private probation company, and I think even owned it while he was legislating, Clay Cox, I'll drop his name because he's public about his cravenness, so I don't think there's any reason to shield him from it now, but he'll show up at the hearing and with a straight face ask the Georgia legislature to impose more costs on people who can barely afford to pay for probation right now, and into the pockets of people with a profit motive to keep these people under correctional control. So this is something that, thankfully we were able to bat that back, and that I don't believe that made it out of the Rules Committee. I have to go check, but other bills that we can't stop. I mean, you can't stop everything. There was a bill to increase the number of fees that are charged for diversionary programs pre-trial, which I think is even unconstitutional. And the legal nonprofits who did work on this issue were telling us that. I raised the issue from the floor. I asked a question of sponsor. I said, isn't it unconstitutional to charge people criminal penalties pre-trial? Because again, in this country, guess what? You're innocent until you're proven guilty. But that is not the attitude of the people in the majority. There was probably the single worst bill that passed this session, in my opinion, was SB 402. And that was a bill to expand the scope of cash bail in the state. You would think bail reform would mean moving away from cash bail and finding alternatives to locking people up for money, where only the rich can afford their freedom and people of lesser means are basically stuck in jail awaiting trial. This bill took out a middle ground option that judges had to impose bail on people, like a number. So if they didn't show up to court, they would have to pay that number, but they wouldn't have to post that number to begin with. So they wouldn't have to come up with 100,000 just because they have a 100,000 bond. They would only have to pay it if they failed to appear for court. Well, this bill took away that option, and the governor's already signed it. So now, if you get any cash bail at all, you have to post it up front, which means you have to go to the predatory bail bonds industry, pay 10% of the costs you don't get back, whatever. And a lot of families can't even afford to get the bondsman to cover the larger bail amount they receive. Also, because of the way that business model works, it's not profitable for bondsmen to cover bonds below a certain amount. So the judge might think they're doing the right thing and being humane by only giving a $500, $250 bond. Well, guess what? What if you can't afford that and the bond company doesn't cover it? Now you are stuck completely, right? Well, the purpose of this bill, and this was openly discussed in committee. This is not like hide the ball stuff where we have to play detective and figure this out. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, where this bill came out of, said the point of this bill essentially is to force judges who are elected, right, to impose severe bonds or bail amounts on people so that they don't have to deal with angry constituents who think that they're not tough on crime. It was the whole point of it was to take away the middle ground option so that judges are forced to pick between completely letting somebody go without bond or imposing a crazy high bond at the front end and using that political pressure to take away people's freedom. Like, I wish that I were exaggerating this, right? But that was the purpose of that bill. There's a whole lot more shenanigans I could talk about, but that's really the bad side of what's happening. There are some good things happening, believe it or not. There's bipartisan consensus on the citizens arrest repeal that we expect next term. We've had multiple hearings where we have come together as both Democrats and Republicans to agree. Think about this. Our citizens arrest law was passed in 1863. Why do you think that the Georgia legislature in 1863 passed a law that said that private citizens could go chase people down, capture them, and carry them to a different location? Well, if you're the president of the NAACP and you suggest what's obvious about why that law was passed, you're going to get a response from Ed Setzler, the sponsor of the Heartbeat Bill, which you're familiar with, that says that testimony is the most offensive testimony he's heard in 16 years on the committee. The idea that the Georgia legislature would act with such a racist intent to basically create a slave catching law. He said it was offensive for the president of the NAACP to testify that that was the purpose of the law because that maligns the Georgia legislature from 1863. So that's the kind of stuff we're putting up against. Sorry, it's easy to pull me back into the negative side of things, but the bipartisan consensus from the committee is we don't need that law. It creates dangerous situations where hostilities get escalated quickly, where people fight to the death in essentially a lawful manner, if you think about it, because if you have a gun and the guy who's trying to arrest you has a gun and you resist with deadly force, it's basically who's left standing and they get to walk away and not get arrested. And that's the kind of dynamic it creates. So what we're working on is an option to carve out certain privileges. Like, for example, if you're a security guard at Target, it will be lawful to detain somebody that is suspected of shoplifting. That is how the law basically is used. The sheriff's DAs went on record saying they're not aware of any real useful uses of the citizens arrest law outside of just on premises. Because again, the difference is if you detain somebody who's already in a space they chose to be, you're not chasing after them and you're not carrying them away to a location that they didn't choose to be in the first place. That's the aspect of an arrest that citizens should not be able to make. But limited detention on the premises of a retail establishment for the purpose of stopping property crime, that sort of thing. There's bipartisan consensus. And again, the NAACP, Southern Center for Human Rights, those organizations are all behind that type of a compromise. So you see when, and let me be cynical for a second, when election pressures set in, and somebody like Chairman Chuck Efstration, who's in one of the closest districts this cycle, is worried about his reelection chances, then you get hearings on common sense criminal legal reform. Let's just state it clearly and plainly, right? But until those screws are tightened electorally, we don't get the basic accountability that we need in the criminal legal system. So, that's a big part of what we're going to accomplish when Democrats take the majority is let's just turn that entire conversation around. Let's not do the barest minimum only when our election prospects are in jeopardy. Let's start with an aggressive, progressive agenda for reforming this system, dismantling parts of this system, right? And James, I see in the chat is right. we need to say their names. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, right? Rayshard Brooks, everybody who is a victim, who is, plastered on our news for weeks on end. Let's not stop there. Let's not do what the Republican majority did and just say their names at the beginning of session being recalled and then call it a day and pass SB 402. Let's translate that initiative, that call for action by the public, into real, meaningful change at the nuts and bolts level in these committees. And that's our calling. So hopefully I won't be quite this angry and animated for the rest of my answers and take up as much time. But I wanted to convey, that is the fight that we're up against right now.
Thanks, Josh. That was great. So Angelika, it's hard to imagine this time last year, we were talking about a different health crisis than COVID. And that was this mysterious lung disease that young people were getting as a result of vaping. And I remember that you had a town hall about that issue, and you proposed you sponsored a bill about the use of tobacco products. And in fact, I think Mary and Josh were co-sponsors on your bill. So I wanted to ask you about tobacco use. Can you update us on what has happened with that bill? I believe there was a bill about raising the age for tobacco use. And can you also talk about the possibility of raising taxes on tobacco products in Georgia and what that effect that might have on our budget?
Yeah, thank you. That is a very, very good question because it goes into lots of facets. You were right. Before COVID-19 started, we were talking a lot about vaping, especially about vaping among our youth in schools. I had a lot of discussion with parents. I had over the summer, last year summer, I had a group of interns working on it, and I worked with the American Lung Association and the American Heart Association on language. And I sponsored a small bill, which would have been just part of it, which its purpose was to raise the age to tobacco 21, which was already then passed at the federal level, but also to broaden the definition or make the definition of what products need to be included, because according in the Georgia code, it is kind of like not as clear as we wanted it to be. I mean, it's a democratic bill, so of course it didn't go anywhere, but there were several other vaping bills introduced, and the one that actually made it through the Senate was one that raises the age to do tobacco 21. I'm not 100% remember the details, and the one thing I remember, it widens the definition of tobacco use and vaping products, but it's also had a critical issue, which I was not a fan of, is it's increased the punitive aspect of punishment for minors for possession of vaping products, and that was not the purpose of the bill. That would have not been my purpose. So there are things we can improve, but in the end, I think the bill was a start that parents and educators wanted, so I voted for it. But this is one of the bills where we say, well, this is the first step. Now we need to make sure that we go back and make it better. And but quite honestly, I don't hear a lot about vaping right now because people are talking about COVID more. The one aspect that we talked about is raising the tobacco tax, bringing it up to the national level. And that was a broader package. And I actually had a town hall with Representative McLaurin about the economic impact, because what happened in this legislature is we had a budget issue coming up. So we were faced with, initially it went from 14% to 11% cuts. We were facing, and everybody was talking about cuts. But my idea is economically, and how can we bring long-term thinking into the state legislatures? Because what we had experienced in Georgia, and by the way, at the time when I didn't live in Georgia, I lived in North Carolina then, significant cuts during the Great Depression in Great Recession in 2008-9. And those cuts really prolonged, especially the defunding, or prolonged the lack of funding for public education. So it took us until 2018 to finally fully fund education. So now we are basically going back and doing similar, and we defund the funding for public schools. We're taking almost $1 billion out of the public school funding, but we are not willing to talk about reasonable and really meaningful revenue. So what we had in our packet from the Democrats, we had several suggestions of how to create long-term sustainable revenue, because we cannot cut ourselves out of every crisis. I mean, it's almost like we cannot always say, so we think about how we take away revenue, and then we hope it's miraculously comes back. Granted, at that time, many of my Republican colleagues were thinking, oh, this is going to be a short-term crisis. We're going to have a V-shaped recovery. And so there was this partisan divide about how this COVID crisis would affect us economically. And that guided a lot of the decision-making. Now we see that this crisis is definitely not over. And when you now talk to experts, we're going to deal with it for quite a while. We have not seen all the economic impacts. But we need to talk about like how we can think long-term of creating sustainable revenue. So one thing was like, let's cut some tax loopholes and for example, bring up the tobacco tax, including vaping products, up to the national revenue, or at least make it higher than, because we're even lower than other tobacco states like North Carolina. So that was something we discussed quite a bit. I think the discussion will come back because we still have to talk about revenue, and the trickle-down economy idea is not working right now.
So Angelika, someone posted in the chat that they have a question about the Johns Creek Police Department. Do you or Josh have anything to comment on what's happening with the Johns Creek Police Department?
Well, let me begin, because I was, as I cover the biggest part of Johns Creek, what happened is the now resigned police chief posted a very questionable racist Facebook post sometime the end of June that caused a lot of uproar in Johns Creek. People were asking for his resignation. It triggered an investigation. In the end, with the city of Johns Creek was not could not reveal what this all was about because it was under investigation. In the end, they said they investigated the police chief for sexual harassment, and a couple of weeks ago they let him go with a nice package of $325,000. So naturally, residents in Johns Creek from all sides are very, very upset. One of the things that happened is that the city said that they cannot disclose what the decision, because they, Josh, help me out, I'm always losing the legal terms on this. They couldn't talk about it. And so there was a problem. So they made a decision that pretty much made everyone in the city upset. Nobody was happy with this. Nobody is happy with this. And they really couldn't talk about it. And so there was just a couple of weeks ago a very, very, very heartbreaking and very emotional city council meeting where many people expressed their frustration about, not just about the amount of money this person got after apparently doing something that was not okay, but also that the issue of race has not been addressed to the satisfaction of many residents in Johns Creek. So I would say, if you're really interested in this, I read the investigation report on this. It's public record, and see what you think, especially for those of you who are residents of Johns Creek, what you think needs to be done in the city. I know there are several resident groups who are working on making the process better in Johns Creek. So I think that's very great citizen engagement. So I don't think we have heard the last of this issue, but this is basically for those who don't know what happened. And it's a very unfortunate circumstances. And what I find is really unfortunate is, like, we really went from discussing the issue of race and Black Lives Matter in a very productive way. We had several Black Lives Matter protests here, peaceful protests, very, very remarkable or very, very well organized with speakers here in Johns Creek, peaceful, the way really you wanted to see how the community gets together and addresses this issue, went away to now really, really disappointing everybody, regardless of where on the spectrum of the discussion you are. So that I think took away from where we had the momentum to really move the discussion forward, and then this all got cycled back. But from a state legislative perspective, what I'm seeing is this shows that we definitely need to continue the discussion on racial justice, police reform, which we already started, and in our Justice for All package. And Josh,
Very briefly,
want to add anything to that?
I'm going to add 2 very short footnotes to what you said, which I completely agree with. And that's number 1, with any issue, but particularly when it comes to race, there's such a premium on listening before speaking. And I think that sums up a lot of that episode. The second thing is local elections matter. And that nowhere is that more visible right now in or around my district than the Johns Creek City Council trying to deal with this. So.
Yeah, and there's municipal elections in 2021, and I think the issues that happened this year will have an influence on what's happening in those elections.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just going to ask one more question for all of you, and you can just raise your hands if you have an answer. We're working tirelessly to win the 16 House seats required to get a majority in the House. If we're successful in doing that, what do you envision would be possible to achieve? Briefly.
One thing I'll say quickly is if we are able to get the tide to turn enough to actually flip the House this cycle, that mathematically almost requires that the Senate comes close. Now, people are not optimistic that we're going to flip the Senate this cycle. I think nobody should count on that. But if we have the kind of numbers we need to show up that strong and like Biden wins the state and that sort of thing, we could come close. And a close Senate with a blue House means a lot. It means redistricting happens a lot differently. It means that certain common sense reforms, like for example, you know, if the Republican majority made Confederate monuments this like sacrosanct, you know, basically untouchable statues, whatever, by choice, there's not a good chance that we're going to be able to just reverse or repeal some of those things while Kemp is governor. But the things that they do carelessly, just for talking points, like that bail bill, for example, we might be able to suggest reasonable reform, particularly if we can move kind of around the exact issue that they legislated on and find a different angle for attacking the problem that they made worse. I would hope that, particularly on criminal justice issues where the Deal Council, Governor Deal was actually really good on some criminal justice issues. And so if we were to continue that momentum to try to reduce the number of people under correctional control, we had smart, common sense ways to do that saved money. I think that is an angle where we could find the Senate and the House working together even through deeply divided times. But that's, you know, I'm biased because criminal justice is my focus, and I want to believe that that's true. But that would be my answer.
And I'm going to add to that. Obviously, we all want that. And I agree with Josh. You know, it really depends on how much of a majority we might gain. Because you have to remember, even if we get the 16, that only puts us at the 91, which allows us then to pass bills. That's saying that all 91 people will vote the same way on everything. And as we've seen, that doesn't always happen. But I think, we're hoping to actually get a few more seats than the 91. I think we're all working very hard. It would be wonderful. Hold all of the seats we have now. We have to remember that, you know, in 2018, we basically flipped close to 12. So we've got to hold those. The 3 of us on this call are some of the ones that flipped. So we're all working very hard to do that. I also see, and I agree with Josh, that the Senate would get a lot closer. And again, while I know Kemp is very entrenched, but I also say that if 2020 goes the way we hope it will, Kemp has to be looking to 2022. And if he thinks he's going to win another term, by, if he wants to fight us tooth and nail, we're showing that the state has changed. We've become more purple, more blue. We're more inclusive. We know those things. I obviously would like to see Medicaid expanded 100%. I think this crisis, unfortunately, may push us more toward that, because economically, as Angelika said, it just doesn't make a sense. You're not going to cut your way out of this without losing a lot of lives, and we can't afford to do that. You know, there's lots of other things. I know Angelika is much stronger on it than I am, but environmental things, so I'm going to let her talk about that. Some of those things that we need to be focused on, of course, education, criminal justice. There's just so many things that we could be doing to treat each other the way we all need to be treated, to work together for the betterment of all Georgians, to be inclusive, to say we can celebrate who we are in Georgia, and we need to. And I'm kind of hoping that a big win for us here in Georgia in 2020 will push Kemp to be more open to hear other ideas. Let's say that. Remember, he will always have the line item veto. I'm not denying that, those things. But I think if he starts to look toward his reelection, if his concepts is he wants to get reelected, he's going to have to play ball. I mean, you hate to say it that way, but that's what it's going to be.
Oh, it's my turn. Yeah, so not to repeat what my dear colleague said before is we have a good chance to really flip the House if all the stars align. We need to gain more seats in the Senate, otherwise the win in the House will just lead to more deadlock. But we also need to keep one thing in mind, why this is so incredibly important that we gain seats in both chambers, and even if we don't come to the full majority, but the census is going on, and next year will decide how the new districts are going to be drawn. And that will determine the future of the state in really new ways. And I'm a strong supporter and endorser of fair districts. So I think we need to draw our district independently and not give it to the parties to make these decisions, because that cannot be good and cannot be in the interest of the voters. But before we can go to that step, we have to make sure that Democrats have a seat at the table so that we can actually start the discussion on fair districts and independent redistricting commissions and things like this. Right now, there is not interest. And you can be assured if the Republican keeps the majority, they will make sure that the districts will be all drawn, that they're going to stay Republican for another 10 years as much as possible. The other thing is, as Mary said, on the environmental side, I'm a member of the Natural Resources Committee. This is another issue that is really truly bipartisan, because we are seeing that conservatives more and more understand the issue of conservation, and there are a lot of issues where we can agree. So what I'm hoping is, if we can get more Democrats elected, then we have a stronger voice in talking about environmental protection in Georgia. I mean, we have coal ash issues, we had sterngetics last year, so these issues are not going away. We can talk about what regulations we really need in Georgia. I had a discussion with a very interesting gentleman who worked for the CDC and the FDA nationally and internationally. And he's told me that, you know what, we are the turning point. We have to decide if we want to continue to be the leader in the world, or if we want to become more like Brazil or India and how we do business here. And so we are the turning point, and Georgia is right in the middle of this. We always like to say Georgia is the #1 state to do business. Right now, I say we are one of the #1 states to catch COVID. So that's not a good, let's say, reputation to have right now. So we really need to change the majorities. And I'm asking here, I mean, if you're on this forum, you already are very engaged and show your interest in how critical this is. But we need to take the discussion out of our personal echo chambers and really engage a lot of voters in this election who may not be as involved or not be paying as close attention as we do. It is more critical than ever. And I'm very concerned if we don't make it this time that about the future of the state and the nation.
Thanks. So while you all were talking, I typed in your website addresses into the chat. So I'm hoping that everyone will look you up, and please donate to your campaigns, of course. But my good friend Lador had a question about canvassing. And so that leads me to where I'd like to end this. If each of you could give us some marching orders, we'd like action items that we can take to help you all get elected. So however you want to start, maybe Mary, I see Mary up at the top of my screen. So I'll start with Mary. Mary, how can we help you get elected?
Well, you're correct. We are at this time are not doing canvassing per se. We are getting ready to do some lit drops, what we would call literature drops. So we will be dropping things off at people's doors, not knocking, no contact, social media, social distancing, mask, gloves. We're going to be doing that starting right after Labor Day. A lot of it will be in my campaign. I think most of us are going to be doing a lot of postcard writing. We're going to be doing those things, but also we're going to be doing a lot of phone banking and text banking. So that's going to be a big help if you see, you know, however you can spend your time. And what's great about joining those kinds of things, while a lot of times we'll do the training at a specific time, the list and the scripts are left open, so you can kind of fit it into your schedule. If you prefer texting, which I know a lot of people do, you know, that's fine too. And then there's a mechanism that it reports back. You know, put your candidate signs out in your yards or other places, because again, with us not being able to go door to door per se, that's going to be one of the things, as we were before talking, you know, North Fulton Dems will have some signs to put out. So it's to show people that, you know, the Democrats are here and we're not going away. But it's those signs, those kinds of communications. The other thing I would say, when you're out in your neighborhoods, when you're out just talking to people, talk up whoever is your local candidate. You know, I'm having now neighborhood meet and greets via Zoom, which is very interesting. Or we're having what's called some driveway meet and greets. So I have different neighborhoods that everybody brings their lawn chair, and you know, we come and we sitting the social distance, all masked, but we're outside. So and we limit to 10 people there. So we're trying to do those things too. So if you are in your district, and you know, contact your Democratic legislator or your Democratic candidates and see if their campaigns are going to be doing things like that. So I'm not sure, Josh and Angelika, are y'all doing more? That's all we're doing, you know, because we basically have about 61 days left.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thank you, Lador, and I owe you a text, Lador, I know. And it's, I know, she's pointing like, yeah, you do. And it's basically what I'm saying now, though. It's, we're gonna have phone banking and text banking as well. I'm getting those lists together. Got postcards in, and so those are gonna be made available. I dropped some off with Terry today, and that's why Terry and I were joking about masks earlier. And apart from that, I mean, it's, you know, it's frustrating, I think, because we all want to be more engaged with our communities, and we all feel more isolated than we usually are. So we are going to be doing digital ads to close the gap as a campaign, and we're sending some mail, like Mary said, to make sure people still know we're here. I will have signs available. I should be getting some more too, if people want to put those out. And if you see a guy in a baseball cap, you know, with jeans on out in a public median somewhere, it's probably me putting out my own signs in the next couple of months, because that's the State House grind. But yeah, anybody who wants to get in touch and talk to me about ways to get involved, there is a form on my website. It's either josh4georgia.com or joshmclaurin.com, and I'll put my personal email in the chat and my phone number as well, in case anybody wants to be in touch. So I'm grateful to everybody who's interested in helping out.
Yes, same here. And we're basically doing the same. I just think going canvassing in these times would totally send the wrong message. to everybody. And as much as I would love to, I personally really miss the one-on-one contact at the door, the conversations. And I feel like we are a little bit more isolated than we want to be because we don't have these conversations. I mean, I'm making a lot of phone calls. So my campaign, it's phone banking, text banking. We're having a few meet and greets on Zoom. I'm open to personal meet and greets up to 10 people, like on the driveway, on the backyard, as long as we can stay outdoors. Signs are coming out, and this year, to resonate my colleagues, is visibility is important, name recognition, so yard signs matter more than ever. So not on the roads, but actually in the yards. The more we can put them out in the neighborhoods at the appropriate time, it still might not be it's still probably a little early. But once ballots are starting to get out, like mid-end to September, that's a good time to put your signs in your yard. And don't get upset if they get stolen. We have enough. We can get you a new one. And to canvassing, here's my favorite person in the world, Ledore, my team, Ledore, because her and I, when she was running for city council, I had the biggest fun canvassing in Sandy Springs. So I'll miss this. She came help on our campaign in 2018, and I want to just pick up one thing she put in the text, that we need to continue to talk about the issue of race. It is not going away. As much as the other side wants it to go away or distract or seed division with this message. I don't even like to repeat it, because one thing I really don't like to do, and I encourage everybody, don't amplify their message by repeating it. Talk about our message, what we stand for. We are the party for the people. We want to help people. We want to help you to get the health care you deserve. We want to make sure that your kids have access to can get the education they really deserve, because that's the economic development we need in the state. So I'm urging everybody, get off the social media box. Don't amplify their message. Instead, amplify our message.
And Mary, if I can add just one other thing, I think for all of us, the concept, remember, we do know there's going to be a lot of early voting, mail-in ballots. So early voting. So a lot of our efforts will not only be talking to voters, but kind of tracking, helping to track those, or as we call, chasing those votes. The other thing I would recommend to people, I think James also said it, volunteer with the local Democratic Party. They're also doing a lot of things. If you're able, consider volunteering either to be a poll worker, if you're able and feel comfortable, or to be a poll watcher. Those are things we know we need. We know, unfortunately, we are preparing for a battle for our lives and for our grandchildren's lives. Before we started, I showed some of you a picture of my granddaughter. That's who we're fighting for, not just us, but the next generation. We need to fix these things now and show that we can live together and do this together. So not only, obviously, our campaigns need you too, but even as we get closer to voting, consider that if you're able and you feel safe doing that, because the more workers they have, we don't want them to be able to say, well, we don't have enough workers, so we're going to limit voting access concepts. So that would be one of my other things as a recommendation after you've done your work with the campaigns, to consider also helping out at the polls as to the best of your ability. And I know not everyone will feel comfortable, but that might be another suggestion.
Great, thanks, Mary. Someone just posted that they had applied to be a poll worker and didn't hear anything. I don't know if this is true, but I had heard that some people that applied through the ACLU had better results in hearing back about becoming a poll worker. So that's another avenue to look into. And before we close, I just wanted to give Terry Crawford a minute. She had something she wanted to say, and she's the head of the North Fulton Dems, so I wanted to give her a moment.
Thank you, Mary. I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight and listening to our three candidates, incumbents. They do need your help. We do need to keep them in office, and we need to vote more in. So please, if you can get involved, we appreciate all that you can do. There are phone banks going on with everybody. There are text banks going on with everybody. We have a total of 17 candidates that touch the North Fulton area that are running for Senate and House seats. And also we have the 5th Congressional District, Lucy Macbeth, to reelect. So you are not wanting for work, put it that way. And we appreciate everything you can do. The North Fulton Democrats would like to, and also the Fulton Democrats, because we are a part of Fulton County. We are just one region out of 3 that makes up Fulton County. Would like to thank the Twin Harbor Group for their support, financial support to the Democratic Party. They've been wonderful. And I have to put something on Facebook about that, but we will be having signs coming out next week that will go to the 6 cities here in North Fulton. Our signs will say 2020. It'll be the same logo that you saw on the convention, but they will say vote local, vote blue. So we will have those out. If you would care for one for your yard, if you make a $10 donation to the Fulton County Democrats, we'll give you one. And if it gets stolen, we'll give you another one. So you don't have to pay for an extra one. But we will have those signs out and about all over North Fulton. There are 500 of them, and we have 8 3x4 signs that will be going out to specific locations. And we appreciate all the help that you give us, financial and otherwise. Thank you so much. We all appreciate it. And to my 3 incumbents, I work for you, and you work for us, but I will tell you, I couldn't be prouder of the 3 of you, and I'm hoping to have more. So thank you all very much. And Joni, thank you so much for setting this up. I appreciate it and asking for us to be part of it. Thank you again. All right. Good night, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, so good night and thank you on behalf of Jewish Democratic Women's Salon and the Fulton County Democrats. And I'd like to just offer Valerie and Joni a chance to say goodbye as well.
Mary, first of all, really all the credit goes to you, but our 3 candidates, you guys knocked it out of the ballpark. I'm over here just like with such appreciation for all the work you do on our behalf. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Same here. I just did too. This just gives me hope and want to keep working harder to make sure we keep you guys in office and make sure we get you the colleagues you need to help swing the state in the right direction. So thank you so much.
I think we're all filled with positivism, and we have you guys to thank for that because you inspire us.
Well, we don't have the energy to get this done without y'all. I mean, it's a tough road, and we're all in it together. And so as much as, I'm so happy to hear that we make you feel empowered, you give us the strength to do it. So thank you.
We all
keep up the good work.
I just want to say thank you all, and Terry, happy birthday. We couldn't do it without you.
And I echo all of that. Thank you to everyone. We're your voice.
Yeah.
That's really why I think all 3 of us did this, and many of us, we're there to represent you, and you're the ones that keep us going. Because trust me, there've been days that we go home and we're like, I'm not. Okay.
Oh, never.
One day, I've had 2 days. I came home and drank a full bottle of wine on my own. I'm gonna be honest. It was, but to get up the next day to go back, hey, because I know
that was my cocktail.
I know if we didn't, it would, sometimes it feels we're not making that difference. But then I think when we step back, we had stopped a lot of bad bills.
That's right.
But also it's because we are your voice, and we're not going to let them silence us, because they should not be able to silence you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I know I was saying goodbye, and I just have one more thing to add. This is going to be a weekly program every Thursday evening at 7. Next week, we'll be doing Fulton County again, but we're going to be doing first-time candidates, not incumbents. And then we'll follow that up with candidates from Cobb County, then candidates from Gwinnett County, and candidates from DeKalb County. So please mark your calendars, 7 p.m. every Thursday night. Thanks.
Every Thursday, be there.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Mary.
Good night.